Rain poured over Accra like the sky itself was breaking apart. Zuri stood outside the glowing entrance of a fancy restaurant, clutching a bouquet of red roses. Her hair was soaked, her makeup smudged, but she didn't care. Tonight was supposed to be her anniversary dinner. She'd spent hours choosing her dress, rehearsing what she'd say when Kwame arrived. But instead of walking toward her with a smile, he came storming out, his face twisted with anger. "I'm done, Zuri. I'm done pretending," he shouted, his voice cutting through the rain. Before she could even ask what he meant, he pushed past her. The flowers slipped from her hands and hit the wet ground. She tried to grab his arm, but he shook her off, jumped into his car, and sped away, tires screeching against the flooded street. The headlights vanished into the storm, leaving her standing there, drenched and trembling. Zuri's heart felt like it was cracking open with every thunderclap. Her tears mixed with the rain as her mascara streaked down her cheeks. For a moment, she just stood there, lost, humiliated, and completely alone. Then, from the shadows near the restaurant's entrance, a tall figure stepped forward. It was Tariq, her quiet bodyguard, the one who had always kept his distance but never stopped watching over her. Without a word, he opened his umbrella and held it over her head. His voice was calm but firm when he said, "He won't get far." And in that instant, something shifted. The night everything broke had just begun. The next morning, Zuri woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy heart. The sound of last night's storm still echoed in her mind. Kwame's angry voice, the splash of rain, the look of disgust on his face before he drove away. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the flowers she had brought home, now wilted and brown at the edges. Everything felt unreal, like she was living someone else's life. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, whispers from friends, co-workers, people pretending to check on her, but really just fishing for gossip. She ignored them all until one message froze her completely. It was from a mutual friend who didn't know how else to say it. "Zuri, I think you should know. Kwame and Nandi have been seeing each other." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Nandi, her best friend, the woman she'd trusted with her secrets, her dreams, even her marriage advice. Betrayal burned through her chest like fire. She threw her phone onto the bed and pressed her hands over her face, trying not to scream. Every memory of laughter, every photo, every late-night talk, all of it suddenly felt poisoned. A quiet knock came at the door. Tariq stood there, dressed neatly as always, his eyes filled with concern. He didn't say much at first, just offered her a glass of water. When she finally looked at him, he sighed and said softly, "I didn't want to hurt you, madam, but I knew something wasn't right. I once saw him at a hotel with another woman. I couldn't be sure who she was, so I said nothing. I'm sorry." Zuri's eyes widened. "You knew?" she whispered, her voice cracking. He nodded slowly. "I suspected, but I had no proof. And I didn't want to accuse him without being certain." She turned away, silent. The pain hit her in waves, not just because Kwame cheated, but because it was with Nandi, someone she loved like a sister, someone who had smiled in her face while stabbing her in the back. But as the hours passed, something inside her shifted. The tears stopped coming. The sadness began to harden into something else, determination. She walked to the mirror and looked at her reflection, messy hair and all. "If he thinks I'm weak," she said quietly, her reflection staring back with new strength, "he's about to learn who I really am." Tariq stood nearby, watching her closely. There was pride in his eyes, mixed with worry. He'd seen that look before, the calm before a storm. Zuri picked up her phone, wiped her face, and straightened her shoulders. The woman who cried in the rain last night was gone. What replaced her was someone stronger, sharper, and ready to take back control. The betrayal cut deep, but she was done bleeding. That night, Zuri sat in her study surrounded by old boxes and folders her father had left her. The rain tapped gently on the windows, softer now, almost like it was listening. She hadn't touched these files in years. Her father used to handle all her legal affairs before he passed away. Back then, she never cared to look. She trusted Kwame completely. But now, after everything she'd learned, she wanted to know exactly what her husband had built and what he was hiding. Tariq stood quietly nearby, helping her sort through stacks of papers. His presence was calm, steady, the kind of silence that made her feel safe. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked gently. "Anything that tells me what's really mine," Zuri said, her voice low but firm. Hours passed as they sifted through dusty folders, company reports, and old contracts. Then Tariq froze, holding up a thick brown envelope sealed with her late father's handwriting. He handed it to her carefully. Inside were documents that made Zuri's hands tremble. Her father had transferred 60% of Kwame's company shares into her name right before the wedding, quietly, without telling anyone. Every signature, every stamp was official. Zuri leaned back in her chair, stunned. All this time, Kwame had treated her like she was just the wife who smiled for the cameras and hosted charity events, while he handled the real business. He had no idea she was the majority owner, that the empire he bragged about was built on her name. Tarek gave a small smile. "Your father was a smart man," he said. "He must have known you'd need this one day." Zuri nodded slowly, a spark of pride flickering inside her for the first time in days. He always said to trust the paper, not the promises. As they continued searching, Tarek found a small digital recorder hidden in one of the folders. Curious, Zuri pressed play. Her blood ran cold as she heard Kwame's voice, bragging to someone about using company funds for private trips, and calling her naive for not noticing. He laughed about moving money offshore, even mentioning Nandi's name. Zuri's fingers tightened around the recorder. For a moment, her heart broke all over again, but then it hardened. "So he thinks I'm a fool," she whispered. "He thinks I'll just cry and move on." Tarek looked at her carefully. "What will you do now?" Zuri stood up and walked to the window. The city lights shimmered through the rain, and her reflection stared back, strong and calm. "He left me crying in the rain," she said softly, a small smile forming on her lips. "But I'll make sure he never forgets it." For the first time in days, she felt alive, not broken, not lost, but powerful. The game had changed, and this time, Zuri held all the cards. By the next morning, Zuri was done crying. The storm inside her had quieted, replaced by a steady calm that even she didn't fully recognize. She spent the night going over every document with Tarek, piecing together her next move. Kwame thought he was untouchable, planning a getaway to Dubai with Nandi using company funds. But what he didn't know was that Zuri already had the power to bring his whole world crashing down. Tarek stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. "If you do this, there's no turning back," he said quietly. Zuri looked up from the desk, her eyes sharp but calm. He made his choice. "Now I'll make mine." The plan was simple and brutal. They would wait until Kwame transferred the company money into his travel accounts, then move in at the perfect moment. Zuri would take control of everything legally, cleanly, and without warning. The next morning, she got dressed like it was any other workday. Her black suit fit perfectly, her hair sleek, her pearl earrings subtle but sharp, the kind of look that said power without trying. Tarek drove her to the office, and as she stepped out, every employee stopped to stare. They had heard the rumors, seen her husband's angry outburst the night before, but Zuri didn't flinch. She smiled politely and walked through the glass doors like she owned the place, because she did. When she entered the conference room, the company lawyer and board members were already there, flipping through papers, discussing numbers, unaware of what was coming. Zuri took her seat at the head of the table. "Mrs. Mensah," the lawyer began with a respectful nod, "these are the documents you requested regarding company authority and account access. If you sign here, it will finalize everything." Zuri glanced at the papers. Every word had been checked by Tarek and her father's old attorney. Once she signed, Kwame's name would no longer hold power. Every account, every asset, every deal would belong to her. She picked up the pen, her hand steady, and signed her name with a graceful stroke. The lawyer smiled, not realizing he had just witnessed a quiet revolution. "Congratulations, Mrs. Mensah," he said warmly. "You now have full control of the company." Zuri smiled back, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you. That will be all." When everyone left, Tarek stepped closer, holding out his phone. "Kwame just made the transfer," he said. Zuri's lips curved into a cold, satisfied smile. "Perfect. Freeze all his accounts." Within minutes, Kwame's world began to crumble. His cards declined, his passwords failed, his empire slipping from his hands without him even knowing why. Zuri stood by the window of her office, the city glimmering below her, and whispered to herself, "He thought I'd break. But I was just getting started." That night, the rain returned, heavier, louder, almost as if the skies were warning Kwame that his time was up. He drove up to the mansion, cursing under his breath, unaware of the storm that was waiting for him inside. When he tried to swipe his card at the gate, the machine beeped and flashed red. Declined. He tried another one. Same thing. His keys didn't work either. "Sir," one of the guards said nervously. Mrs. Mensah gave new orders. "No one enters without her permission." Kwame's face turned red with anger. "What nonsense is this? I own this house," he shouted. But the guards didn't move. The rain soaked his expensive suit as he fumbled with his useless keys, kicking the gate in frustration. His calls to the bank went nowhere. His accounts were frozen. His power was gone. Then he saw her. Zuri stepped out from the shadows, dressed in a long black coat, holding an umbrella with the kind of calm that made his rage look childish. The rain fell all around her, but not a single drop touched her. She looked like she had walked straight out of a movie, poised, controlled, untouchable. "Running again, Kwame?" she said softly, her voice cutting through the storm. Kwame laughed bitterly. "So this is your little show, huh? You think you can destroy me?" He moved toward the car, splashing through puddles, muttering insults under his breath. "You'll regret this, Zuri. You hear me? You'll regret this." He jumped into his car, turned the key, but the engine didn't start. He tried again, slamming the wheel in frustration. Then, suddenly, bright headlights flashed across the driveway. A black SUV pulled up, blocking the exit completely. Tarek stepped out, tall and composed, rain dripping from his jacket. He didn't say much, just stared at Kwame with cold, steady eyes, the kind of look that said everything without words. Kwame got out of his car, furious. "You think you can stop me? You're just a bodyguard," he shouted. Tarek didn't flinch. His voice was calm but sharp when he said, "You're not going anywhere." The sound of thunder filled the silence that followed. For a long moment, no one moved. The rain pounded harder, washing over the driveway, soaking everything in silver light. Zuri took a few slow steps forward until she stood just a few feet from Kwame. "You had everything," she said quietly. "A good life, a wife who loved you, and you threw it all away." Kwame's anger faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Zuri turned away, her expression unreadable. "Lock the gates," she said to Tarek. And as the metal gates clanged shut behind them, the storm roared louder. The same storm that once broke her was now the one that surrounded him. The storm raged outside as Zuri and Kwame stood in the center of the mansion's grand living room. Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the windows, but inside it was quiet, the kind of silence that comes right before something explodes. The lights flickered, and the glow from the chandelier cast long shadows across the marble floor. Kwame stood dripping wet, his shirt sticking to his skin, his face a mix of anger and fear. "Zuri, listen," he started, his voice softer now, pretending to be calm. "I made mistakes, I admit that. But you don't understand the pressure I've been under. The business, the expectations, it all got too much." Zuri didn't say a word. She sat down on the edge of the couch, crossing her legs neatly, her umbrella still in her hand. Her calmness made him uneasy. He took a few steps closer, lowering his voice. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You know I love you. It was just confusion. Nandi meant nothing. You and I, we can fix this." She finally looked up at him, her eyes sharp but unreadable. "You're only sorry because you got caught," she said quietly. Kwame's jaw tightened. "That's not true," he said, trying to sound sincere. "I was going to tell you everything. I was planning to make things right." Zuri tilted her head slightly, her tone calm but cold. "Really? Make things right by stealing my inheritance and disappearing to Dubai with her?" Kwame froze, his confidence cracking. "What are you talking about?" he asked too quickly. Zuri reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. "You should recognize this," she said, tapping the screen. A faint static filled the room before a familiar voice played, his voice. On the recording, Kwame laughed with another man, talking about draining accounts, hiding company money, and leaving Zuri behind. Every word was clear, every lie exposed. Kwame's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" he stammered. Zuri stood slowly, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked closer to him. "You really should be more careful about what you say in your office," she said. "You never know who's listening." For a moment, he looked like he might cry, then his expression twisted into anger. "You think this makes you powerful?" he snapped. "You think you can ruin me?" Zuri smiled, not cruelly, just calmly. "I don't have to ruin you, Kwame. You did that yourself." The thunder crashed again, shaking the room. She stopped a few steps away from him, meeting his panicked eyes. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You thought you could leave me crying in the rain," she said softly, "but you forgot who owned the storm." Kwame's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him as the truth hit hard. Zuri turned away, her reflection flashing in the rain-soaked window, calm, powerful, and finally free. The next morning, the mansion that once felt like a palace now looked like a crime scene. Red and blue lights flashed across the wet driveway as police cars lined up in front of the gates. The air smelled of rain and tension. Inside, Zuri stood by the large window, watching everything unfold below with quiet eyes. Tarek was already outside, handing over thick folders to the lead officer, documents that proved everything. Bank transfers, fake invoices, offshore accounts. Every lie Kwame ever told was now on paper. Zuri had spent the night making sure every detail was perfect. There would be no escape this time. Kwame came stumbling down the stairs, his face pale, his shirt half-buttoned. "Zuri," he shouted, panic in his voice. "What's going on? Why are the police here?" She didn't answer. She just turned slightly, her expression calm, almost distant. A loud knock came from the door. The officers entered, firm and professional. "Mr. Kwame Mensah, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering," one of them announced. Kwame's eyes went wide. "This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything. This is a setup," he yelled, struggling as two officers grabbed his arms and pulled him toward the door. "Zuri, tell them this isn't true." But Zuri said nothing. She just stood there, composed and silent. As they dragged him outside, his phone buzzed in his pocket, Nandi's name flashing across the screen. He managed to grab it for a second before one officer took it away. "Call her," he shouted. "She knows the truth." But Nandi wasn't picking up. Across town, she was already packing her bags, deleting photos, and pretending none of it had ever happened. When she finally tried to reach Zuri, the call went straight to voicemail. Her number was blocked. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, soaking the police uniforms and the marble steps. Kwame twisted to look up one last time, his wrists in cuffs. Zuri had stepped out onto the balcony, the wind blowing her hair back, her face unreadable. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world felt still. He looked desperate, broken. Nothing like the man who once thought he was untouchable. Zuri didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply said, clear and calm, "Goodbye, Kwame." He froze, the words hitting harder than any slap. The officers guided him into the car, and as the doors shut, the rain poured harder, washing over the driveway, carrying away the traces of his downfall. Zuri stood there for a long time, watching the convoy disappear through the gates. The sound of thunder echoed once more, but this time it didn't scare her. The storm had come full circle, and she was the one standing tall in the rain. Days later, the mansion was finally quiet. No shouting, no chaos, just the soft sound of rain outside and the ticking of a wall clock. For the first time in a long while, Zuri sat in her living room without feeling like she had to hold her. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed felt strange, almost too calm. She sat curled up on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders, staring at the window where raindrops slid down the glass. Everything in the house reminded her of what had happened. The spot where Kwame used to sit, the hallway where they once laughed, the dining table that now felt too big for one person. It wasn't emptiness she felt, though. It was peace mixed with a kind of sadness that didn't hurt as much as it used to. Tarek walked in quietly, holding a cup of tea. "It's over," he said softly, placing it on the table in front of her. His voice was gentle, the same tone he used when she was too exhausted to speak. Zuri nodded slowly. "I know," she said, her eyes still fixed on the rain. "It just doesn't feel real yet." He sat across from her, watching her with quiet concern. "You did what you had to do. You stood up for yourself. That's not easy." She gave a faint smile, small but real. "Maybe. But winning doesn't always feel good right away." Tarek nodded, understanding. He'd seen the fire in her when everything was falling apart. Now he was seeing the woman who had survived it, softer, wiser, but still strong. After a long pause, Zuri reached for her laptop and opened an email draft she'd been working on for days. "I've decided to donate a part of my company's shares," she said, her voice steady now, "to a women's foundation. They help women who feel trapped, like I once did." Tarek's expression softened. "That's a good thing. You'll help a lot of people." Zuri looked up, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "No one should ever be left in the rain again," she said quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside grew lighter, like even the sky was starting to calm down. Tarek smiled slightly and stood. "You should rest," he said. "I will," Zuri replied. "Eventually." He nodded and left the room, leaving her in the soft glow of the afternoon light. Zuri leaned back on the couch, sipping her tea slowly. It was warm, comforting in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. The house was still, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of something new, her second chance, her quiet victory after the storm. Months passed, and the city had moved on from the scandal. The newspapers had stopped printing Kwame's name, and Zuri's company was stronger than ever under her leadership. The chaos that once ruled her life had turned into quiet mornings and peaceful nights. She had built something new, not just a business, but herself. One afternoon, while the soft hum of rain played against the windows, the housekeeper handed her a cream-colored envelope. There was no name on the front, just a prison address stamped at the top. Zuri didn't need to guess who it was from. She sat by the fireplace, the letter trembling slightly in her hands as she opened it. The handwriting was messy, rushed, nothing like the confident man she once knew. "Zuri," it began. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've lost everything. Nandi is gone. She left me for someone else. The money's gone, the house, the company. I'm paying for what I did every single day. Please, if there's any piece of you that remembers the love we had, forgive me." Zuri read the words slowly, her face calm. She could almost hear his voice, full of the same charm that once fooled her, but now it just sounded empty. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly and held it over the flame. The fire caught the paper quickly, curling the edges, turning the words into ash. She watched it burn until there was nothing left. There were no tears, no anger, just quiet acceptance. Tarek walked in a few moments later, stopping at the doorway when he saw her by the fire. "A letter from him?" he asked gently. Zuri nodded. "He wanted forgiveness." Tarek tilted his head slightly. "And did you give it to him?" She gave a small smile, eyes still on the fire. "In my own way, yes. I let him go." He stepped closer, watching her with that quiet respect he always carried. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked softly. Zuri turned to face him, her expression calm and sure. Only trusting the wrong man, she said. Then, after a short pause, her voice softened. But I'm learning to trust the right one. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The firelight flickered between them, warm and golden. Tarek held her gaze, a hint of emotion in his eyes, admiration, maybe something more. Zuri looked back at the flames, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The woman who once cried in the rain was gone. What remained was someone stronger, wiser, and finally free. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night was still, but in that silence, it felt like fate had finally come full circle, and this time it was on her side. The rain had returned to Accra, falling softly over the city like a memory. Zuri walked down the same street where everything once fell apart, the place where she had stood, crying and heartbroken, with mascara running down her face and flowers slipping from her hands. But this time she wasn't broken. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She was walking tall, her heels tapping against the wet pavement, her eyes bright and alive. Beside her was Tarek, calm as always, holding an umbrella over her head. The two of them moved in quiet rhythm, the rain splashing around their feet. There was no tension, no words needed, just peace. For the first time in a long time, Zuri felt light. She laughed softly, looking up at him. Funny, she said, her voice warm, how life brings people into your storms just to show you who really stays. Tarek smiled, his eyes soft. Some storms are worth walking through, he said quietly. They reached the corner where she once stood alone, and she paused for a moment, watching the raindrops dance under the streetlights. The camera would linger here, on her glow, her calm, her strength. As the thunder rolled in the distance, her voice echoed gently, as if carried by the wind. He left me in the rain, thinking I'd drown. But I learned to dance in it. The camera slowly tilted up toward the stormy sky, where lightning flashed against the clouds. Soft music played, not sad but powerful like a promise. Then the screen faded to black, and white text appeared across the screen. Never underestimate a woman who's been through the storm. She becomes the storm. It was the perfect ending. Not revenge, not pain, but rebirth.